Morning came thin and pale across the plains, as if the sun itself were unsure it was welcome. The land stretched wide and unjudging, yet the town crouched at its edge like a thing that measured worth with narrowed eyes. She walked that road alone, her steps steady, her breath practiced, her body carrying more weight than the world thought forgivable. Dust clung to her hem. Silence clung closer. She had learned long ago how to move without asking space from anyone, how to fold her shoulders inward, not from shame exactly, but from habit. The West taught its lessons early. A woman could be strong and still be overlooked. She could be kind and still be laughed at. She could carry her heart openly and be told it was too much, like the rest of her. The town knew her without knowing her. They knew her shape, her slowness, the way she avoided mirrors and crowds alike. They knew her usefulness well enough. She worked when there was work. She listened when no one else would. She left places better than she found them, and took nothing that could not be spared. Yet none of that earned her tenderness. It never had. That morning she was walking toward an ending she had rehearsed in her mind many times. Not dramatic, not loud. Just another closing door. The man waiting for her was not cruel. That almost made it worse. He stood straight, hat in his hands, eyes already apologetic. He spoke of realities, of how the world was, of how affection must follow certain shapes to survive. He did not say she was unlovable. He did not have to. His voice carried the truth gently, like a burden he wished he did not have to hand her. She listened without interrupting. She always did. When he finished, she nodded, because nodding was easier than breaking. She told him she understood. She told him she wished him well. And when she turned away, she felt something inside her settle, like dust after a long drive. Another hope laid to rest without ceremony. It was then she said it aloud, not to him, not even to herself, but to the space between things. She was not fit for any man. The words did not shake. They sounded almost reasonable, as if she were naming a fact, like weather or distance. She believed them, because believing had become a kind of shelter. If she expected nothing, nothing could be taken from her. She did not see the cowboy at first. He was leaning against the rail near the general store, watching the morning stretch itself awake. A man carved by work rather than ambition. His shoulders held quiet strength, the kind that came from lifting what needed lifting, without complaint. He had children at home. That much showed in the way his eyes moved, always measuring time, always listening for trouble that might never come. He did not stare at her. He noticed, which was different. Their lives brushed past one another, without touching. She continued down the road, carrying her rejection like a folded letter in her pocket. He watched her go, not with pity, but with a kind of stillness that suggested he was holding something back. He had learned to do that too. His house sat just beyond the edge of town, where the land began to forget people. It was a place shaped by loss. A wife gone too soon. Children growing faster than grief could keep pace with. Meals eaten in silence not because words were forbidden, but because they were tired of falling short. He managed, as men like him always did, but the managing cost more each day. She did not know these things yet. All she knew was that work was scarce and dignity scarcer. She knew that she had love to give and nowhere safe to put. When word reached her that the cowboy needed help, not a wife, not a dream, just hands and patience, something inside her eased. Need was familiar ground. Need did not ask to be desired. They spoke plainly when they met. No promises were made. No softness was offered. She told him she was not suited for romance, that she did not expect it and did not want it. Her voice did not waver. She had practiced this truth until it fit comfortably in her mouth. She told him she could care for his children, that she could keep a house steady, that she could be useful. The cowboy listened, really listened. His silence stretched long enough to feel dangerous. For a moment she thought she had misjudged him, that even usefulness had its limits. Then she saw his jaw tighten, saw something pass behind his eyes that looked like fear rather than refusal. He did not answer right away. He went quiet, as if the weight of her words had pressed him inward. In that silence, something shifted. Not love, Not yet. But recognition. Two people standing on opposite sides of the same tired truth, both shaped by what they had been told they could not have. He finally nodded, slow and careful, as though agreeing to more than an arrangement, as though stepping into a future he had not allowed himself to imagine. She did not smile. She had learned not to trust beginnings. But as she walked away toward a house that was not yet home, she felt the smallest stirring of something unfamiliar. Not hope, not belief, but the quiet sense that the story might not be finished after all. The house stood with its back to the wind, as if it had learned the hard way what survived and what did not. Wood darkened by years of sun and sorrow, a roof patched with patience more than skill. When she first crossed its threshold, she did so quietly, as though afraid the walls might reject her too. The children watched from the corners of the room, their eyes cautious, already practiced in measuring adults by how long they stayed. She moved slowly, not from weakness, but from care. Each step considered, each gesture softened before it reached the air. She did not announce herself as necessary. She simply began. A broom lifted. Water warmed. The sharp edges of the day dulled just a little. The house noticed before the people did. The cowboy kept his distance at first. Not unkindly. He had lived too long with loss to rush toward anything that resembled comfort. He spoke to her in practical terms. What needed doing, where things were kept, when the children ate. His voice carried no expectation beyond function, and she accepted that with relief. It was easier to be useful than wanted. The children tested her, without meaning to. One lingered in doorways. Another refused to meet her eyes. The youngest hovered close, drawn by something unspoken, then fled as if afraid of hoping. She never corrected them sharply, never demanded affection. She understood the language of hesitation. It had been spoken to her all her life. At night, when the house grew still, she lay awake listening to its unfamiliar sounds. The sigh of boards settling, the breath of children dreaming, the cowboy's footsteps pacing, until sleep finally claimed him. She wondered if this was how belonging began, not with certainty, but with shared quiet. Word traveled as it always did, softly at first, then with sharpened edges. Some said she had trapped him with pity. Others laughed at the arrangement, unable to see what kind of bargain could exist without beauty. She heard none of it directly. That was almost worse. Silence had a way of reaching her anyway. Once, while hanging laundry, she caught her reflection in the window. The woman staring back looked older than she felt, broader than she wished, and yet steadier than she remembered being. For a moment, she allowed herself to stand tall. The glass did not crack. The world did not end. It was a small rebellion, and it stayed with her. The cowboy began to notice changes he could not explain. Meals tasted warmer. The children argued less, slept deeper. Laughter appeared unexpectedly, like grass after rain. He told himself it was temporary, that order always felt miraculous when it first returned. Still, he found his eyes seeking her out, measuring her presence the way one measured light at dusk, unsure when it had shifted. They spoke more as days passed. Not of feelings, never of that, but of weather, of work, of the way grief bent time until past and present blurred. She listened without fixing. He learned to speak without apologizing. It was an uneasy balance, but it held. One evening, the youngest child climbed into her lap without asking. The weight was sudden, complete. She froze, afraid to breathe, afraid of doing it wrong. Then small arms tightened around her, trusting in a way that left no room for doubt. Something in her chest loosened, not with joy, but with release. She had not known she was holding herself together so tightly. The cowboy witnessed it from the doorway. He said nothing. He had no language for what he felt then. Gratitude? Perhaps. Fear? Certainly. A growing awareness that the lines he had drawn between need and love were thinning, whether he approved or not. She reminded herself often why she was there. Not for him. Not for belonging. She told herself this was temporary. A season of usefulness before the world corrected itself. When the thought of leaving came, it did so quietly, like a tide pulling back. She prepared for it without packing. That too was habit. The tension lived in the space between them, unspoken but present. She guarded her heart with careful hands. He guarded his with silence. Neither wanted to be the first to reach across the distance and find nothing waiting. Yet something had changed. The house breathed differently now. The children moved through it with less fear. And on certain evenings when the sun sank low and the day released its grip, the cowboy would sit at the table longer than necessary, listening to the soft sounds of a life stitching itself together. She would catch him watching her then, not measuring, not judging, just seeing. And in those moments, she felt the ground shift beneath her certainty. The belief that she was unfit for any man began to loosen, not because she was suddenly beautiful, but because she was undeniably needed, undeniably present, undeniably human. The section ended not with a promise, but with a pause. A house no longer hollow. A woman standing in a place that did not push her out. A man realizing that silence, once his refuge, was becoming a question he could not avoid forever. The season turned without asking permission, and with it the careful balance they had built began to strain. Warm days lingered longer, and evenings carried a softness that invited confession. She felt it first in the way her body relaxed within the house, no longer braced for departure. That frightened her more than rejection ever had. Hope, once awakened, was harder to silence. The children no longer watched her, as though she might disappear. They moved around her with the easy confidence of belonging, leaving their small weights against her sides, trusting her hands to steady them. When one of them spoke her name without thinking, the sound settled deep in her chest. She answered gently, always gently, afraid that any sudden joy might startle the moment away. The cowboy noticed how often he returned home earlier than before, how his steps slowed as he neared the house, as if he were approaching something sacred rather than familiar. He told himself it was for the children. He repeated it until the words lost their meaning. When he caught himself listening for her voice among the others, he felt a tightening behind his ribs, a warning he had learned to heed too late in life. They shared more silence than speech. It was a comfortable quiet, heavy with things not yet named. Sometimes their hands brushed while passing bread or tools, and the contact lingered just long enough to be felt, not long enough to be claimed. Each time, she reminded herself why she was there. Each time, he reminded himself of the world's rules, rules that had already taken too much from him. One afternoon, a neighbor came calling, bringing with him the town's curiosity disguised as concern. His eyes flicked toward her body, then away, polite but unmistakable. His questions were aimed at the cowboy, but the answers hung in the air between them. Arrangements, he called it. Temporary, he implied. She stood still, hands folded, absorbing the old familiar ache. It returned quickly, like a scar remembering its shape. That night, she could not sleep. The walls seemed thinner, the house less certain. She sat at the table long after the lamps were lowered, tracing the grain of the wood, counting the ways she had mistaken safety for permanence. When the cowboy joined her, drawn by her wakefulness, neither of them pretended surprise. He spoke of practical matters at first, repairs that needed doing, winter that would come too soon. She listened, then surprised herself by asking if she should begin making other plans. The words fell between them like a dropped plate. He did not answer right away. His silence felt heavier than before, weighted now with consequence. She told him she understood the arrangement, that she had never expected more. She reminded him of her place carefully, as though placing herself back on a shelf where she could not be accused of reaching. With each word, something in her voice thinned. She hated that she sounded like a woman asking permission to exist. The cowboy finally spoke, his voice low, uneven. He said he did not know what was happening to him, that the house felt different now, and so did he. He admitted he was afraid of wanting something the world would question, afraid of hurting her by failing to be brave enough. The honesty cost him. It showed in the way his shoulders sagged when the words were done. She listened, her heart aching with a tenderness she had no defense against. She wanted to tell him that being afraid did not make him weak, that loving quietly was still loving. But she had spent her life being the one who understood, the one who stepped aside to make room for others' fear. This time, understanding felt like erasure. The next morning, she rose before dawn. The decision formed slowly, solid as stone. She would leave before the house learned to depend on her too deeply, before the children felt the absence as a wound rather than a change. She began setting things in order, the way she always did when preparing to be forgotten. One of the children found her then, standing in the doorway with sleep still clinging to their eyes. They asked if she was going somewhere. The question was simple, unguarded. It undid her more thoroughly than any cruelty ever had. She knelt to meet their gaze, her hand steady despite the storm inside her. She told them she would always care for them, no matter where she was. The child nodded, accepting this as truth, then leaned into her without fear. The weight was familiar now. It grounded her even as it broke her heart. When the cowboy returned that evening, he found the house too quiet. Not empty, but altered. She was still there, yet something had shifted irrevocably. He saw it in her eyes, in the way she moved as though already half gone. Understanding came too late and all at once. The section closed on that recognition. Two people standing on the edge of a truth neither had dared to claim. A woman preparing to leave not because she was unwanted, but because she was too close to being loved. A man realizing that silence, once a shield, had become the very thing threatening to take her from him. Morning arrived with a hush that felt deliberate, as though the world itself were waiting to see what choice would be made. She moved through the house quietly, gathering the few things that were hers, careful not to disturb what she had helped build. Each folded cloth, each clean surface, felt like an apology she did not know how to speak aloud. Leaving had become a skill. She had practiced it long before she arrived. The children sensed it before words could give it shape. They lingered near her, touching her sleeve, watching her face with a seriousness that belonged to older souls. She smiled for them, a soft, practiced curve meant to reassure. Inside, her resolve trembled. Love, she was learning, did not leave cleanly. When the cowboy came in, the air between them tightened. He saw the bundle by the door and understood. The understanding struck him hard, stealing his breath. For the first time since she had entered his life, he did not know how to keep his distance. Silence rose in him out of habit, then faltered, no longer enough. He asked her where she was going, though he already knew. She told him she had stayed as long as she could, without asking for what she was not meant to have. Her voice did not accuse. It simply stated a truth shaped by years of restraint. She told him she had come to love the children, and that loving them meant leaving before her absence could become a wound. He went quiet then, but this silence was different. It was not avoidance. It was the sound of a man gathering himself. When he spoke, the words came slowly, uneven but certain. He told her that when she had said she was not fit for any man, he had believed her, not because it was true, but because it was easier than questioning the world that taught him what to want. He told her he had gone quiet because he was afraid of how much peace she had brought into a life he thought was finished. She listened, stunned by the weight of his honesty. He did not offer rescue. He did not promise transformation. He told her only that the house had learned her shape, that the children had learned her voice, and that he had learned, too late, that strength did not look the way he had been taught. She tried to answer, but emotion closed her throat. For a moment, she feared it was another near truth, another kindness that would stop short of choice. Then he stepped closer, not touching her, just closing the distance he had guarded so carefully. He said he did not want her to stay because she was useful. He wanted her to stay because she belonged, if she chose to. The children watched from the doorway, sensing the gravity of the moment. One of them reached for her hand. Another leaned against the cowboy's leg. The small, ordinary gestures felt monumental. She realized then that love had already taken root, not with ceremony, but with constancy. She told him she was tired of making herself small to fit the world's comfort. She told him she would not stay unless she could be seen fully, without apology. He nodded, the motion firm, unflinching. He said he did not need her to be anything other than what she already was. The words were simple. They changed everything. She set the bundle down. The sound it made against the floor was soft, final. The house seemed to exhale. The children smiled without understanding why. The cowboy reached for her hand, tentative, respectful. When she let him take it, the touch felt less like a beginning and more like a continuation of something long underway. Life did not suddenly become easy. The world outside the house did not soften overnight. There were still glances, still whispers, still days when doubt crept in uninvited. But inside those walls, there was a steadiness that held. She no longer measured her worth by who could want her. He no longer hid behind silence when truth demanded voice. Years later, the story would be told quietly, if at all. Not as a romance that defied the West, but as a reminder of what the West often missed. That love was not a reward for beauty, nor a consolation prize for loneliness. It was a choice made daily, in small acts of courage and care. And to those listening, the truth lingered like a benediction. You are not unfit because the world failed to recognize you. You are not too much, nor too late. Sometimes, the deepest love waits in the quiet spaces, asking only that you believe you are worthy of being seen. The house stood steady against the wind, and within it, a woman no longer preparing to leave, a man who had learned to speak, and children who grew up knowing that love did not arrive loudly, but it stayed.